Hey everyone, happy Friday. Okay, so today is part 2 of lesson 2 about World War One. And so here in class today, of course, we're starting out just kind of reviewing, of course, that the Western Front was dominated by trench warfare, ended up in a stalemate right off the bat. Okay, and they were just gonna basically slug it out for 4 years on the same strip of land. Really, no territory lost, no territory gained, and the Western Front is going to be just incredibly brutal, high casualty rates, and a lot of resources being spent and placed in that area. Just to try to wear the other side down in this war of attrition. The Eastern Front, however, is actually much more mobile. Okay, it's got the battles that you see fought on the Eastern Front. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some trench warfare taking place, but nothing like the Western Front. The video that you're going to watch to the 5 minute and 45 second mark is going to show you that, there's a lot more like movement. You're going to see the territory loss, territory gains, and again, like movement along along the borders of Germany and Russia and Eastern Europe, in the Ottoman Empire, in the Middle East. And then, guys, this is a global war, and you've got the powers that be that are fighting it with tons of colonial holdings. And so there's fighting taking place in Africa. There's fighting taking place in Asia and the South Pacific. And so again, there's so much more than just the fighting that takes place in Europe. Now, the vast majority and the worst fighting is taking place definitely in Europe. But I mean, again, it can't be called a world war if that's the only arena and those are the only players. So with that being said, I also want to kind of, just show you guys this right quick because we're going over this in class. So the Entente, the Triple Entente, if you'll remember, of course, was Great Britain. I'm trying to do this. This is kind of weird. Great Britain, France, and Russia. Okay, and the Triple Alliance was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy to begin with. They are going to change their names, which I know this kind of makes it confusing, but they're going to change their names, and the Triple Entente is going to become the Allies, and then the Triple Alliance is going to become known as the Central Powers. Okay, and then you'll see that Italy is going to jump ship. Okay, Italy is going to jump ship and come over here to the Allied side. And it's because they get promised some territory that the Austro-Hungarian Empire had acquired. And Great Britain is kind of like, hey, if you come on our side and we win, we'll make sure that you get that back. And I mean, hey, that sounds good. And then you'll see, of course, that Japan and the United States enter onto the Allied side. And then the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria are going to enter onto the side of the Central Powers. So I just kind of wanted to show you guys that right quick so that, if all of a sudden I'm talking about the Allies and you're like, well, wait a minute, I thought the Triple Alliance was Germany and Austro-Hungarian Empire and Italy, and now she's talking about the Allies being Great Britain and France. Like, I'm not losing my mind. They switched their names on us. So, just kind of bear that in mind. The Allies are Great Britain, France, Russia, what will be Italy, Japan, and eventually the United States. And the Central Powers are Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. So here we go. All right, this is just another map to kind of showcase what I was just explaining again, but it says the Triple Entente, but it's the Allied powers. They're in kind of the orangey yellow. In pink, you've got your Central Powers, and then in blue there you have your neutral powers. But again, this is the video that I would like for you to watch, this oversimplified video. Only watch it to the 5-minute 45-second point, because after that he's going to start talking about the Russian Revolution, and of course we haven't gotten there yet. We're going to start that on Tuesday of next week. So now if you want to, you can finish it out and get you a little intro into what's coming, but just kind of understand it. In class, we're only watching it to that 5-minute 45-second point. Okay, so we've talked pretty extensively at this point about trench warfare. Y'all watched the video over it, yesterday, and it's tough, right? Like, to me, World War One and looking at trench warfare is almost more sad. And I mean, it's pretty hard to get more sad than any of the than World War II. But I mean, it's just psychologically, I can't imagine being a soldier involved in trench warfare like on the Western Front during World War One. I mean, like, basically I'm living in a hole that's just really terrible and awful, and I have to like run out into this dystopic wasteland, and I'm probably going to die, and if I don't, all I get to do is crawl back into this miserable hole. I mean, like, that was some soldiers' entire existence for 4 years. I mean, if they survived the entire war. And so, it's just, again, that just the trench warfare aspect of things during World War One is, and then just the fact that their techniques didn't match the technology. I mean, these machine guns are just mowing men down en masse. And it's just, it's just sad to think about and know about, whenever it's like, why didn't you change your tactics? Considering your weaponry. But World War One, in a lot of ways, was just a huge experiment. Because of industrialization and the new weapons. I mean, so many of these military generals and leaders just really didn't know how it was going to go down. And even air warfare. I mean, this is the first arena of war conflict that we've talked about that has had air warfare, had airplanes, and had an air force. One of the things that the Germans create, this is a clip from a movie called Flyboys that's about a World War One French air division. So it's kind of interesting. It's got James Franco in it. One of the movies I listed on Google Classroom earlier today to watch. But so one of the things that the Germans created was the Zeppelin. And it's a blimp. There's the first blimps. But I always think, can you imagine like being in a small village in Belgium and seeing this giant like silver blob coming and like dropping bombs and stuff on you? I mean, like horrific, something out of some like sci-fi, scary, freaked out. I mean, anyways, but they are highly effective at the beginning of the war, honestly, because of their shock value and because of their, psychological impact. I mean, because again, they were scary. I mean, anything in the air at this point for a lot of people is kind of scary to see. No one's ever seen anything really flying in the air, much less a big, huge blimp with guns and bombs coming out of it. So, from 1914 to about 1916, they're used again, like they bomb London, they bomb cities in Belgium, they bomb battlefields along the Western Front. But again, because World War One is basically this big experiment, the British and the French start realizing, okay, they're freaky, don't get me wrong, but they're slow and they don't get very high. And so this is really when anti-aircraft weaponry is created. And I mean, if y'all have studied World War II or watched any World War II movies at all, you have seen anti-aircraft weapons and artillery. And so it's because of the Zeppelins and it's because of World War I that any of that technology is even thought of or created. And again, that becomes massively important in World War II when air forces become a huge part of the tactical maneuvering of militaries. So, anyways, the air warfare component of World War I makes a big difference moving forward in how wars are fought. So this is just a video kind of telling you about Zeppelin tech. So again, like the war starts to widen, right? Pretty extensively by 1917. A few years into the war, I mean, it is very much like, again, this world conflict. The United States isn't quite in the war yet. We are going to enter in kind of late 1917, and it is not because they sink the Lusitania. I have so many students that regularly answer, why did the United States get involved in World War I? Well, they sank that ship that starts with an L. No. Okay. It's more than that. Okay. Yes, they do sink the Lusitania in May of 1915. That does have American civilians on it. But that's, again, we don't get involved until 1917 in the war. So it's not like, you can't say that that's the reason why we entered when it happened 2 years prior to our entry. Okay. So the question is, why did Germany sink this passenger liner? Why would they sink a ship that has civilians on it that's just trying to get from like New York to London? That seems pretty shady and pretty much like a jerk move. Why would you do that? Well, the United States had said, oh, we're neutral. We're not getting involved. But we were sympathetic to the British and the French, or the whole Allied plight against the Germans and the Austrians. We very much sided on their side. And we were selling them tons of resources and honestly making bank off of it. We were making lots and lots of money off of World War I. And I mean, that's because wars, whether you like it or not, are pretty profitable for certain people on whichever side that you're on. But anyway, so we were definitely on the like making a lot of money side, and what we were doing is we were putting these resources on these passenger liners, okay, because we believed that, all right, civilians are on them, they won't get messed with. Well, Germany looked at that as hey, you are being detrimental to our war aims. And, if you're willing to risk the civilians, that's on you, because you are sending war supplies against us to the Brits. And so the Germans felt justified in their submarines attacking these passenger liners because of that. Now, once the Lusitania is sunk, the United States tells Germany, like, hey, you better stop. Don't do that again. And Germany stops. They do not attack passenger liners from about the summer of 1915 to the beginning of 1917. And the reason why they start up again in February of 1917 is because everybody's just so worn out, right? Like everybody's just real done with the war. And everybody is looking for that one thing that might tip the scales in their favor. And so the Germans say, you know what? I know we agreed not to do this, but at this point, we're real done. We don't care. Bombs away. Okay, submarines, go for it. You can attack whatever you want. But in addition to the Germans letting the submarine warfare be completely unrestricted, they send what becomes known as the Zimmermann telegram. Okay, so there's a German officer whose last name is Zimmermann. Poor guy, he goes down in history for this one. And he sends a telegraph via like just Western Union, okay, to the Mexican government saying, hey, if you come to our side, we will send you resources, we'll help you out, and we want you to invade the southern border of the United States. And when we win, we will give you back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Well, again, they send this telegraph via just like normal old Western Union. Well, the only Western Union telegraph line that had been laid on the Atlantic, or, on the bottom of the Atlantic, was from London to New York. That was the only Western Union line. And so all of your telegraphs went through the London office, and then all of your telegraphs for, that were trying to get to North America went through the New York office. And so you can imagine being like the Western Union guy that works in London, right? And being like, am I reading this right? Like, is this legit? And they, of course, tell their bosses, who then inform the British military, or, the British government. And the British government, of course, waves it in front of the United States and in front of our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, like, hey, Are you still like not going to declare war? Is it, I mean, like, what's it going to take for you to get involved? Look, they're trying to recruit Mexico. And that was really, in addition to them letting loose their submarines, those were the reasons why we got involved finally, again, towards the end of 1917. But as it says there in the PowerPoint, U.S. troops are not going to arrive in large numbers until about April of 1918. This is another video we're watching about the U.S. entry into the war. But World War One, is very much a total war. I want you, we a lot of times we focus in, when we look at the conditions on the battlefields and and like the technologies that were used and certain battles here and there. But World War One and World War Two both are what's called a total war. I mean, like, guys, we live in a post-industrial society where everything is available to us. I mean, we can, in even a small town in Texas like Gatesville, we have HEB, we have Walmart. Heck, you could really honestly dang near go grocery shopping at the Stripes. Okay, I mean, you've got an abundance of food and resources available at your fingertips. That wasn't the case in the early 1900s. You have to bear that in mind. This mass production of food was not going on. This was still, people were still very much like, they had their own gardens, they had their own chickens, they had their own milk cow. I mean, they put up and smoked meats for their families. I mean, like, people were still very much living kind of a subsistence, lifestyle in terms of how they got their food. And so, when you have this war taking place and your government is trying to feed this huge population of men in the military, all of those resources that normally would go out to the public don't get to the public because they're all having to get to the troops. So that's the reason why, like yesterday, you saw the housewife, holding all of her canned goods. I'm patriotic as can be, and ration points don't worry me. Well, I mean, even that right there, it's the whole point of the propaganda, of course, is you need to have your own garden. You need to be canning your own vegetables. You need to be making sure that you are self-sufficient and not relying only on goods from a store because they may not be there for you. And so you have even, you can only buy so many tires. You can only buy so many cans of paint. You can only buy so many nails. You can only buy so much gas. I mean, like, so everything is being rationed and because it's all being sent to the war effort. Whereas we've never felt really anything like that. I think that the most I've ever felt a sense of loss in terms of things not being readily available to me has actually just been in the last year with the pandemic. Hello, the toilet paper run and the paper towels. I mean, you couldn't find any of that for a while. And that was like one little moment. This was 4 years of and that was toilet paper, for goodness sake. I'm talking about like food, and just like gas and stuff that you actually like legit really need. So don't get me wrong, everybody needs toilet paper too, but you know what I'm trying to say. But anyways, because of this, your government actually gains a large amount of power because in any time of crisis, prime example, I've been asking my students, like, if something happens in your household that scares you, who do you immediately go to? Well, you run to like mom and dad, and you're like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? The people are the same way when there's a crisis. They look to their leaders in their government and go like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And so during war, government officials, again, like because it's a war, because it's a crisis, even when you are in a constitutional government, a democratic government, they become much more like totalitarian or dictatorial because there isn't time to get everyone's vote. There isn't time to get everyone's opinion on something. Like, you have to make hard and fast executive decisions. And that's just the nature of the beast, because, hey, if we lose this, we're all speaking German. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, we don't have time for this because I have to make the decision now. So even like economically, your free market economies, your free market capitalist based systems shift to looking more like communism. Because again, everything is being government controlled. Everything is also being rationed out. You can only have X amount. You can only have so much. And now, again, in your democratic free market countries, as soon as the crisis is over and it is averted, then you go right back to democracy and capitalist economies and free market systems and things like that. But during a crisis in history, it's not rare to see, again, your government gaining more and more power, and making decisions that are not democratically based. So just kind of, it's another part of total war. It's affecting not only the people that are fighting, but the people back at home, the governments, the economies. I mean, like, it's affecting everything. So you can imagine, it's not just the men who are fighting that end up becoming highly war weary. It's the people even back at home. And guys, Great Britain is not a huge place, okay? And you have millions and millions of people, men, dying in this war. I mean, look at this. During the 10-month Battle of Verdun, 1 million soldiers are killed. Another 1 million are going to be killed or wounded at the Battle of the Somme. If you watched the video, the oversimplified video, in the first day of the Battle of, I want to say it was the Battle of Verdun, and the first day alone, 60,000 men are killed. 60,000. The entire population of Gatesville, Texas is like 7,500 people. I mean, just to kind of give you an understanding of how many men that is in one day. Okay. And so you actually, in certain villages in Britain, had entire populations of men die, okay, that were in between the ages of like 18 and 40. I mean, you literally had entire populations in those age brackets of inside villages. They did not come home. So, I mean, you had families that were losing husbands, sons, uncles, father-in-laws, fathers, brother-in-laws. I mean, like, you had entire families wiped out of their male lines unless, you had a little boy that had already been born before dad went off to war or whatever, or a brother that was too young to enlist or be drafted. So again, it's not just the men that by 1917 are, getting hard to keep pushing forward, which is why, propaganda was so huge, right? You've got, this is why we end up with posters like this. You talk of sacrifice. He knew the meaning of sacrifice. It's to try to, implore the public, like, you've got to soldier on yourself. Like, you've got to keep it up, because if you don't, the alternative is that we lose and Germany takes over. So the British Parliament even passes what becomes known as the Defense of the Realm Act, or DORA. And I mean, again, you want to talk about like democracy kind of going out the window. If you protested the war publicly or went against the war effort in any way publicly, you were arrested as a traitor. Newspapers are censored, sometimes even suspended. Again, so there goes freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom to protest. I mean, that goes out the window because, again, the most important thing at that particular moment is winning the war. And, again, if you are going to try to say anything that undermines those efforts or do anything that undermines those efforts, we don't have time for that. We don't have time to mess with you, and you're just going to get locked up. And so again, total war is truly total war. It is at home, on the front, politically, economically, all the things. So, one of the things that just pours salt in an already really highly open wound is in the fall of 1918, which is towards the end, of course, of World War I, when millions of people have already died, the Spanish flu hits. So there have been a lot of parallels, actually, in the last year or so made between COVID-19 and the Spanish flu. Now, in terms of how deadly they are, there is no comparison. The Spanish flu was way more deadly than COVID-19 is proving to be. But in terms of worldwide, the worldwide effect of them both and response to them both, we haven't seen anything like that since the Spanish flu. We haven't seen, entire countries locking down and things like that since the Spanish flu. But the Spanish flu is going to hit Europe in April of 1918. It actually originates in Kansas here in the United States. It's called the Spanish flu because they don't really realize that they have an epidemic on their hands until it starts killing millions of people in Spain with the arrival of U.S. soldiers to the World War I effort there in Europe. So that's why it gets the nickname Spanish flu. But it actually originated in Kansas. But it's going to kill worldwide in the course of about 18 months to 2 years, 50 million people. Okay, COVID-19, we've been aware of it for about 18 months, and it's killed just shy of 3 million people worldwide. So, again, and it killed 50 million people in 1918 to 1919. Okay, Corona has killed about 3 million people in 2020 and 2021. So, again, there's a pretty massive difference in terms of death rate. But again, there's a lot of comparisons made because it's the first worldwide pandemic that we've kind of dealt with since then. So this is actually a really interesting video to watch, especially at the end, because it was made prior to COVID-19. And you'll understand what I'm talking about. Again, when you watch the end, you'll kind of be like, what? So anyways, last but not least, clearly women are a huge part of the war effort and a part of that total war equation in World War I, because all the men are fighting. It's going to be the same in World War II as well. Women are going to do jobs that men typically do. They are going to be a huge reason why, the war effort is successful for the Allies. The biggest gain that comes out of World War I is women's suffrage, really. After World War I is over, women very much go, excuse me, like, we were just as much a part of this as the soldiers. We were manning the factories. We were the truck drivers. We were the factory workers. We were the chimney sweeps. We were the farmers, because our husbands, our fathers were all off at war, and many of them didn't come home. And so we are still doing all of these jobs, keeping our overall country afloat industrially. And you mean to tell me you're not going to give me the vote? You're going to tell me that I'm just some lowly housewife that can't vote? You can't hide behind that justification any longer. And so, again, by the 1920s, especially, women in these countries had gained the vote, really in large part because they proved, to the powers that be that, hey, like, we're a little bit more capable than you give us credit for. So that is the end of lesson 2 for World War I. We will pick up the Russian Revolution because, of course, it happens in tandem with World War I. The Russians are going to have to withdraw in 1917 and go deal with this. And we'll talk about that on Tuesday of next week after you guys take your formative. Have a great weekend. As always, stay safe. And if you're going to prom, have a good time and be careful. Bye.